Precision over power, the rifle that won battles. The battlefield has always favored power. Bigger guns, louder explosions, overwhelming force, these are the images most people associate with victory in war. Yet history repeatedly shows something far quieter at work, something far more precise. In the shadows of roaring artillery and massed infantry charges, there exists a different kind of weapon, one that does not rely on volume or brute strength, one that rewards patience, discipline, and mastery. This is the story of a rifle that didn't dominate through power, but through precision, and how it quietly reshaped battles when power alone failed. At first glance, the rifle seemed unremarkable. It lacked the intimidating presence of heavy machine guns or the dramatic impact of artillery. There was no spectacle when it was deployed, no thunderous announcement of its arrival. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other service rifle of its era, wood stock, steel barrel, simple sights. But those who understood it knew better. They knew that within its design lay an idea that challenged conventional thinking, that accuracy, consistency, and reliability could outweigh raw firepower. The soldiers who carried it quickly learned that this rifle demanded respect. It was not forgiving of sloppy technique or rushed shots. Every squeeze of the trigger reflected the shooter's discipline. Every miss was a reminder that this was not a weapon for indiscriminate fire. It rewarded those who took the time to understand wind, distance, breathing, and timing. In return, it delivered something far more valuable than noise. It delivered results. Early engagements revealed its true strength. While enemy forces relied on volume, spraying rounds in hopes of suppression, this rifle quietly removed key threats. Officers, machine gun crews, observers, targets that mattered. Each precise shot created confusion far beyond its immediate impact. Orders went unanswered. Units hesitated. Movements slowed. It wasn't just about eliminating soldiers, it was about disrupting system. One accurate round could achieve what dozens of uncontrolled shots could not. What made this rifle exceptional was not just its mechanical accuracy, but its consistency under harsh conditions. Mud, rain, dust, heat, none of it seemed to diminish its performance. In environments where other weapons jammed or lost zero, this rifle kept working. That reliability built trust, and trust changes how soldiers fight. When a soldier believes in his weapon, he takes calculated risks. He holds positions longer. He engages with confidence instead of fear. That confidence, multiplied across units, alters the character of entire battles. There is also a psychological element that cannot be overstated. The enemy quickly learned to fear what they could not hear. No long bursts, no warning, just sudden precise losses that seemed to come from nowhere. Patrols slowed, heads stayed down, leaders avoided exposing themselves. Entire formations began to behave differently, not because they were overwhelmed by firepower, but because they were being hunted with intention. Precision introduced uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the most powerful weapons in war. This rifle also reshaped tactics on the friendly side. Instead of relying solely on suppressive fire, units began coordinating movement around accurate shooters. Advances were timed with precision engagements. Defensive positions were reinforced not by more guns, but by better angles and fields of fire. The rifle became a force multiplier, allowing smaller units to punch far above their weight. Battles that should have required overwhelming numbers were instead won through timing and placement. What's remarkable is how little credit this approach initially received. High command often favored numbers and firepower in reports and planning. Precision work rarely showed up in dramatic after-action summaries. Yet on the ground, soldiers knew the truth. They knew which weapon allowed them to move safely. They knew which rifle turned impossible situations into survivable ones. They knew that power could fail, but precision endured. The men who mastered this rifle became students of their environment. They learned to read terrain like a map written in shadows and angles. They understood when not to fire as well as when to take the shot. Restraint became a weapon in itself. Every bullet carried purpose. Nothing was wasted. In a world defined by chaos, this rifle represented control. Over time, its reputation grew not through propaganda, but through results. Veterans spoke of it with quiet respect. Stories circulated of battles turned, positions held, and advances made possible by a single well-placed shot. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, but it worked, again and again. This is not a story about a miracle weapon. It is a story about philosophy. About the idea that precision, when paired with skill and discipline, can overcome brute foe. RCE, that a rifle in the right hands can shape events far beyond its size or appearance. And as the war dragged on and conditions grew harsher, this lesson became impossible to ignore. Because when power faltered, when noise failed to intimidate, and when chaos ruled the battlefield, it was precision that quietly decided who advanced and who did not. As the war intensified, the contrast between power and precision became impossible to ignore. Entire units armed with automatic weapons could unleash storms of fire, yet still fail to advance. Ammunition was burned at staggering rates, barrels overheated, and positions were revealed by sheer noise. In these moments, the rifle proved its worth again and again. It did not compete in volume, competed in certainty. Each shot answered a specific problem. Each round carried intent, not hope. Soldiers who relied on it quickly adjusted how they thought about combat. Instead of reacting to chaos, they began shaping it. They waited for patterns to emerge, for movement to repeat, for human behavior to betray predictability. The rifle encouraged observation. It forced patience. Where others rushed, these men studied. Where others fired to suppress fear, they fired to remove obstacles. This shift in mindset changed the rhythm of engagements. Battles slowed, but outcomes became more decisive. The rifle's design played a critical role in this transformation. Balance allowed for steady aim even after hours in position. Its trigger was predictable, breaking cleanly without surprise. Its sights, though simple, offered clarity and consistency. There were no unnecessary features, no excess weight, no distraction. Everything about it reflected a singular purpose: place one round exactly where it needed to go. In an era obsessed with rate of fire, this was a radical philosophy. Environmental conditions that crippled other weapons only reinforced its reputation. Rain soaked battlefields into mud. Fine dust crept into every mechanism. Cold stiffened fingers and warped materials, yet this rifle continued to perform. Zero held, feeding remained reliable, accuracy stayed true. For soldiers operating far from supply lines, this reliability was not a luxury, it was survival. A missed shot could mean exposure, a jam could mean death. Consistency under pressure became its defining trait. As word spread, enemy forces adapted, but not always successfully. They attempted to counter precision with more movement, more noise, more suppression. Yet these adaptations often made them more vulnerable. Faster movement revealed patterns. Heavier fire exposed positions. The rifle punished carelessness. It rewarded discipline. Every attempt to overpower it only highlighted the limits of brute force. The battlefield slowly tilted toward those who understood that control mattered more than chaos. On the friendly side, confidence grew. Small teams began operating with greater independence, knowing that precision coverage reduced risk. Advances were planned around fields of fire rather than barrages. Defensive lines relied on visibility and timing instead of volume. The rifle didn't replace other weapons, it complemented them, making every supporting element more effective. Artillery became more targeted. Infantry moved with purpose. Even logistics benefited as ammunition consumption dropped and efficiency rose. There was also a moral dimension to precision that few spoke about openly, but many felt. Fewer shots meant fewer unintended consequences. Engagements became more deliberate, more restrained. Soldiers understood exactly why they fired and whom they fired at. This clarity mattered. It reduced hesitation born from chaos and replaced it with conviction born from responsibility. The rifle demanded accountability, and in return, it gave its users control over moments that might otherwise spiral out of hand. Training around the rifle evolved naturally. Marksmanship became more than a qualification, it became a craft. Soldiers practiced breathing, trigger control, and position building until movements became instinct. They learned to estimate distance without instruments, to read wind from foliage, to sense timing rather than rush it. This depth of training created professionals rather than trigger pullers. The rifle did not make them skilled, it revealed skill already earned. Commanders began to notice patterns in after-action reports. Engagements supported by precision elements showed lower casualty rates and higher success in limited objective missions. Positions once deemed too costly to assault were taken with minimal loss. Reconnaissance patrols returned more often. Defensive holds lasted longer. Slowly, doctrine shifted. Precision was no longer a niche capability. It became a cornerstone of effective operations. The enemy, too, learned the lesson, though often painfully. Attempts to match precision with power failed repeatedly. More guns did not solve the problem. More noise did not restore C. On trial, what they faced was not just a rifle, but a way of fighting that punished inefficiency. Precision exposed weakness. It exploited impatience. And once fear set in, even superior numbers could not guarantee success. This rifle never claimed to win wars on its own. That myth belongs to propaganda, but it undeniably won moments. And in war, moments decide outcomes. A delayed order, a neutralized observer, a halted advance. Each moment, precisely handled, shifted momentum. Over time, those shifts accumulated into victories that power alone could not secure. What emerged was a quiet truth that reshaped how battles were understood. Power could dominate space, but precision dominated decisions. One controlled shot could achieve what minutes of uncontrolled fire could not. The rifle became a symbol of this truth, not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it controlled. And as the war pressed on, this lesson would only grow more important, proving again and again that precision, not power, was the factor that truly won battles. As campaigns stretched on and resources thinned, the value of precision became even clearer. Ammunition shortages plagued units that relied heavily on volume. Supply lines were strained, transport routes were targeted, and resupply became uncertain. In this environment, the rifle's efficiency was no longer just tactical, it was strategic. Fewer rounds fired meant fewer rounds needed. Every bullet saved was one that did not have to be hauled across hostile terrain. Precision quietly solved problems that power could not. Soldiers who mastered the rifle began to think differently about distance and timing. They learned that the battlefield extended far beyond immediate sight. Engagements no longer began when the enemy was close enough to hear. They began when the enemy entered a zone of influence. Long before contact, positions were chosen, ranges estimated, and outcomes anticipated. This foresight turned defense into offense and offense into control. The rifle allowed its user to shape events before they fully unfolded. The psychological strain on the enemy intensified as precision dictated tempo. Troops moved hesitantly, constantly scanning terrain, unsure where danger might appear. Leaders avoided exposing themselves, delegating from cover, which slowed communication and degraded command effectiveness. Every delay compounded the problem. A force that cannot move confidently cannot fight effectively. Precision, by its nature, undermined confidence without ever needing to overwhelm. The rifle also changed how terrain was valued. High ground, concealment, and clear lines of sight became more important than sheer cover. Instead of fortifying positions with layers of sandbags and overlapping fire, units sought angles, elevation, and visibility. A single well-chosen position could dominate an approach that would otherwise require multiple machine guns. Precision compressed force. It allowed fewer soldiers to control more space, shifting the balance in environments where manpower was limited. This shift was especially evident in defensive operations. Where power relied on sustained fire to repel advances, precision relied on disruption. Attacks were broken not by stopping every soldier, but by collapsing cohesion. Remove a leader at the wrong moment, halt a key element, and momentum died. Confusion spread faster than fear. Units stalled, regrouped, and often withdrew, not because they were destroyed, but because they could no longer function effectively. Offensively, the rifle enabled advances that would have been suicidal under older doctrines. Movement was synchronized with precision fire. Threats were neutralized before they could react. Infantry crossed open ground not under the protection of noise, but under the protection of certainty. Knowing that specific dangers were already addressed changed how soldiers moved. Hesitation vanished. Confidence replaced chaos. What truly set this rifle apart was how seamlessly it integrated with the human element. It did not replace judgment, it amplified it. Poor decisions were still punished. Good decisions were rewarded disproportionately. The weapon demanded thought. It forced its user to slow down, to analyze, to choose wisely. In doing so, it elevated the quality of combat rather than escalating its intensity. Precision refined warfare instead of inflating it. The rifle's influence extended into planning rooms as well. Commanders began factoring precision into operational design. Objectives were selected not just for their strategic value, but for their susceptibility to controlled engagement. Timelines were adjusted to exploit observation windows. Operations became less about overwhelming force and more about sequencing. Precision allowed plans to breathe, to adapt, to respond intelligently instead of reacting blindly. Enemy countermeasures evolved, but rarely effectively. Smoke screens, erratic movement, and increased patrols were employed, yet each introduced new vulnerabilities. Smoke concealed, but also disoriented. Erratic movement disrupted formation. Patrols stretched manpower thin. Precision thrived on these imperfections. The more the enemy tried to mask their weakness with activity, the more patterns emerged. The rifle punished inconsistency with ruthless efficiency. Veterans who carried it spoke less about kills and more about moments. The moment an advance stalled because a single threat was removed. The moment a patrol turned back because uncertainty outweighed aggression. The moment a defensive line held because pressure dissolved. These moments rarely made headlines, but they decided outcomes. Precision worked quietly, almost invisibly, yet its fingerprints were everywhere. Over time, the rifle became more than a tool. It became a philosophy embedded in those who used it. They learned that restraint was not weakness, that patience was not hesitation, and that control was the highest form of power. This mindset outlived the war itself. Soldiers carried it into training programs, doctrines, and future conflicts. The lessons learned around this rifle shaped generations of thinking about how battles should be fought. In the end, the rifle did not win battles by destroying everything in its path. It won by choosing exactly what mattered and acting decisively. It proved that efficiency could outperform excess, that clarity could defeat chaos, and that precision, when paired with discipline, was more enduring than brute force. And as wars continued to evolve, this lesson remained unchanged. Technology advanced. Weapons grew more complex, but the principle stayed the same. Victory belonged not to the loudest or the strongest, but to those who understood when, where, and how to act with precision. As the war progressed into its most demanding stages, the contrast between raw power and deliberate precision became even sharper. Large formations still moved, artillery still thundered, but beneath all of it, outcomes increasingly depended on control rather than force. The rifle represented that control. It allowed its user to decide not only when to fight, but when not to. And in war, the ability to withhold action can be just as decisive as the ability to strike. In prolonged engagements, fatigue eroded discipline. Soldiers firing automatic weapons burned through ammunition and energy at unsustainable rates. Noise masked communication and confusion multiplied. In those same environments, the rifle remained calm, almost indifferent to chaos. Its operator did not rush, he observed, he waited. While others reacted to events, he anticipated them. This separation from the emotional temp of battle created a powerful advantage. Precision functioned outside panic. One of the most underestimated aspects of this rifle was how it simplified decisions. Instead of managing bursts, reload cycles, and suppressive arcs, the shooter focused on a single outcome. One sight picture, one trigger press, one result. This simplicity reduced cognitive overload. Under extreme stress, fewer variables meant fewer mistakes. The rifle did not compete for attention, it demanded focus. And in return, it delivered clarity in moments when clarity was rare. The enemy began to recognize patterns in their failures, even if they could not fully explain them. Attacks that should have succeeded stalled without obvious cause. Defensive positions collapsed without being overwhelmed. Leadership losses occurred at moments that crippled momentum. Precision introduced fragility into systems that depended on continuity. Remove the right element at the right time and strength became irrelevant. The rifle excelled at identifying and exploiting these moments. Terrain once considered secondary gained new importance. A ridge, a tree line, a ruined structure, these became decisive features when paired with precision. Control of sightlines mattered more than control of space. A single vantage point could dominate an entire approach. This shifted how units planned movement and defense. Maps were no longer read only for routes, but for angles. Precision redefined geography. Even morale began to follow this logic. Soldiers who trusted precision felt less pressure to rush. They knew that threats would be addressed deliberately. This reduced reckless behavior and preserved cohesion. Units became quieter, more disciplined, more deliberate. Confidence no longer came from noise or numbers, but from competence. The rifle, in this sense, trained its users as much as it armed them. On the logistical side, the benefits were undeniable. Fewer rounds fired meant lighter loads, fewer resupply missions, and reduced exposure. Convoys moved less frequently. Stockpiles lasted longer. Precision quietly solved problems far behind the front lines. In a war defined by stretched resources, this efficiency mattered. It allowed commanders to allocate assets where they were truly needed instead of compensate. G for waste. Critically, the rifle also influenced how success was measured. Instead of counting rounds fired or ground taken at great cost, effectiveness became about outcomes achieved with minimal loss. This reframing altered decision-making at every level. Operations were judged by efficiency rather than spectacle. Precision encouraged accountability. Every action had to justify itself. Waste, whether of ammunition or lives, became harder to excuse. The enemy struggled to adapt to this philosophy. Their doctrine emphasized saturation and aggression. Precision disrupted both. Aggression became predictability. Saturation became exposure. Attempts to overwhelm precision only fed it more information. Every movement revealed intent. Every burst revealed position. The rifle thrived on this transparency. It turned excess into vulnerability. What made this shift so profound was how quietly it happened. There was no formal declaration that precision had replaced power. No single moment where doctrine officially changed. Instead, it emerged organically from results. Units that embraced precision succeeded more often. Those that ignored it paid the price. Over time, the evidence became undeniable. Precision was not an alternative to power, it was its evolution. Veterans later reflected that this rifle taught them restraint above all else. It taught them to value timing over speed, placement over volume, and understanding over aggression. These lessons followed them beyond the battlefield. They influenced leadership styles, training philosophies, and how future conflicts were approached. Precision became a mindset, not just a method. In the end, the rifle's true legacy was not the battles it helped win, but the way it changed thinking. It proved that dominance does not require excess, that control outperforms chaos, and that the quietest tools often shape the loudest outcomes. Power may seize attention, but precision decides results. And as this war moved toward its conclusion, that truth became impossible to ignore. Precision had not merely supported victory, it had defined it. As victory drew closer, the influence of precision became embedded in every layer of the battlefield. What had once been considered a specialized approach was now quietly shaping standard operations. Units no longer advanced blindly into resistance. Instead, they paused, observed, and let precision do the work first. The rifle had proven that control could be established before contact, and that once control existed, outcomes followed naturally. One of the most significant shifts was how risk was calculated. Previously, success often meant accepting heavy losses in exchange for momentum. Precision changed that equation. Commanders learned that patience could reduce risk without sacrificing progress. A single, well-placed shot could neutralize a threat that might otherwise require an entire platoon to assault. This reframing saved lives, conserved resources, and preserved fighting strength for future engagements. The rifle also exposed the limits of intimidation. Noise, explosions, and mass fire were meant to overwhelm the senses and break morale. Precision worked differently. It targeted confidence. Soldiers could endure chaos, but uncertainty was harder to withstand. Not knowing where danger would come from forced hesitation. Hesitation slowed movement. Slowed movement broke coordination. The rifle dismantled cohesion piece by piece, without ever needing to dominate the battlefield visually. As enemy forces grew more cautious, they also grew less effective. Timelines slipped. Objectives were delayed. Coordination between units frayed. Precision created friction at every level. Even when no shots were fired, the possibility alone altered behavior. That silent influence was one of the rifle's greatest strengths. It shaped decisions before engagement ever began. For those carrying it, the rifle reinforced discipline. There was no room for impatience or ego. Each engagement required calm judgment. Shooters learned to let opportunities pass if conditions were not right. This restraint prevented mistakes that could expose positions or waste effort. Precision demanded humility. It rewarded those who understood that not every moment required action, and that the right moment mattered more than the first one. This discipline extended beyond individual shooters. Entire units began adopting quieter movement, better spacing, and improved concealment. Precision influenced behavior indirectly, raising overall effectiveness. Soldiers became observers, not just participants. Awareness replaced aggression. The battlefield grew quieter but more lethal in its intent. The rifle's impact was especially evident in defensive holds. Positions that would once have required constant suppressive fire were now held with minimal engagement. Precision allowed defenders to break attacks early before momentum built. This reduced fatigue and preserved ammunition. It also denied the enemy psychological victories. Attacks that failed without visible resistance were deeply demoralizing. Power could be challenged. Precision felt inevitable. As the campaign entered its final stages, the rifle had reshaped expectations. Victory no longer required overwhelming strength. It required understanding. Terrain, timing, and human behavior mattered more than raw numbers. Precision aligned all three. It created an environment where smaller forces could prevail, where planning mattered more than noise, and where outcomes were decided long before the first shot was heard. Even after the fighting slowed, the lessons remained. Soldiers spoke of the rifle not with excitement, but with respect. It had demanded more from them than other weapons: more patience, more awareness, more responsibility. In return, it had given them control in situations where control was rare. That exchange defined its legacy. The rifle did not win battles by force. It won by denying the enemy options. It limited movement, disrupted plans, and eroded confidence. It proved that power without direction was wasteful, and that precision without discipline was impossible. Together, precision and discipline reshaped warfare in ways that would influence conflicts long after this one ended. As historians later studied these battles, they noticed a pattern. Engagements influenced by precision showed fewer casualties, shorter durations, and more decisive outcomes. The rifle's role was subtle, often overlooked in dramatic retellings, but undeniable in analysis. It was the quiet constant behind success. What made this weapon truly remarkable was not innovation alone, but alignment. Design, training, and mindset all pointed toward the same goal: control. When those elements aligned, power became secondary. Precision became decisive. By the time the war reached its conclusion, the question was no longer whether precision mattered. It was how long it had been underestimated. The rifle had answered that question in silence, one deliberate shot at a time. In the final phase of this story, the true meaning of what this rifle represented became impossible to separate from the war itself. Long after major offensives ended and front lines stabilized, the effects of precision continued to shape outcomes. It was no longer just about winning engagements. It was about defining how victory was achieved. The rifle had proven that restraint could outperform excess, and that understanding the battlefield mattered more than dominating it with noise. What stood out most in hindsight was how quietly this transformation occurred. There was no dramatic announcement, no sudden abandonment of old methods. Instead, results spoke. Units that relied on precision suffered fewer losses, completed objectives more efficiently, and maintained cohesion under pressure. Commanders took notice not because doctrine told them to, but because reality demanded it. Precision worked, and in war, effectiveness always finds a way to the surface. The human element remained central throughout. This rifle did not make decisions on its own. It required a mind capable of patience, a steady hand, and a willingness to wait for the right moment. In that sense, it elevated the role of the individual. One person, properly trained and disciplined, could influence events far beyond their immediate position. This idea challenged long-held assumptions about scale and power. It suggested that influence was not measured in numbers alone. Enemy forces never fully solved the problem this rifle posed. They adapted tactically, but they struggled psychologically. Precision removed predictability. It disrupted patterns and punished routine. Over time, this unpredictability eroded confidence. Soldiers hesitated. Leaders became cautious. Momentum was lost not through defeat, but through doubt. And once doubt set in, power became difficult to apply effectively. As the war ended and lessons were documented, this rifle stood as a symbol of a broader shift. Warfare was no longer only about who could produce more firepower, but who could apply force intelligently. Precision represented efficiency, discipline, and intent. It showed that battles could be shaped before they were fought, and that outcomes were often decided by those who understood timing better than strength. The legacy of this rifle extended into future conflicts, influencing training, doctrine, and design. New weapons were evaluated not just for power, but for accuracy, reliability, and the cognitive demands they placed on their users. Precision became a standard, not an exception. The mindset it fostered continued to shape how soldiers thought about engagement, responsibility, and control. And yet, despite its profound impact, this rifle rarely dominated popular narratives. Loud weapons and dramatic assaults captured attention while precision operated in the background. Its successes were subtle, often invisible to those not looking closely, but history, when examined carefully, tells a different story. It reveals that many decisive moments were the result of deliberate action rather than overwhelming force. In the end, this rifle did not win battles by itself. People did, but it gave those people the ability to act with clarity in chaos, to impose order where confusion reigned, and to decide outcomes with intention rather than desperation. That is why it mattered. That is why it endured. The lesson it left behind is as relevant now as it was then. Power draws attention. Precision creates results. In any conflict, whether on the battlefield or beyond it, those who understand this difference gain an advantage that cannot be easily countered. If you found this story compelling, if you appreciate the hidden mechanics that truly decide history, then this is exactly the kind of content this channel is built for. Subscribe to stay with us as we uncover more real events where intelligence outweighed force and where quiet decisions change the course of wars. Like the video if precision fascinates you more than spectacle, and share it with others who want to understand how battles are really